When my brother was born in 1939, he was named James W. Davis, James Woodrow Davis. And somewhere when he was a little boy, he got the nickname of Tim. All of my family called him Tim, all of our aunts and uncles and neighbors. So that's all I ever knew him as. In school, he was JW. When he joined the military, the friends that he had in there called him Jim Davis. So if I refer to him as Tim or my brother, you'll know who I'm talking about. My memories of him revolve mainly around the chores and the work that we did living out in the country on a farm. My dad had a full-time job at a hardwood plant in another town, and he worked shift work. He also farmed 40 acres of land. So there were many times when he was at work or sleeping that Tim was told what to do, and then he was in charge of my other brothers and me as we worked in the fields. We grew most of what we ate. My dad had a large garden, and we had animals of all kinds. We had chickens and pigs and cows and occasional odd animal or two like goats or guineas or rabbits. But mainly I remember Tim as being hardworking and strong. He was a kind person. Though there wasn't a lot of spare time in the spring and summer and fall because we were involved in planting corn or cotton and working in the garden and the fields. But on rainy days and in wintertime, I can remember Tim and Raymond and I sitting around the kitchen table playing dominoes and Chinese checkers. Our other brother, Barry Neal, was of a different temperament. Sometimes he would play with us, but mainly if he was losing in whatever game we were playing, he would get mad and get up and walk off. So Tim and my younger brother Raymond and I were very close, and we spent a lot of time together. There weren't any drugs anywhere around. There were no gangs, mainly because it was a very poor area. We seldom saw our classmates except during the school year. There were no other children that lived anywhere around us, so we ended up spending a lot of time together and became very close.
I was working at a department store as a supervisor in the stationery department, and he came in with some friends to the snack bar. And I knew some of his friends, and I told them that I wanted to meet him. And so I met him, and he came over and talked to me, and the next day he came back and asked if I was seeing anyone, and I said no. So he asked me out for a date, and we went out on a date. And that's how I met him. The Air Force Base was about 20 miles from Georgetown, where I lived. And so the guys always took taxis to get into town. So he asked me out for dinner and a movie. And we took the taxi, went to the restaurant, had something to eat, and then went to the drive-in movie and sat in the taxi. Taxi driver left, and we sat there and watched the movie in the taxi. There wasn't, because none of us had a car. So that was our first date. With him. He had the most piercing hazel eyes. In fact, Debbie has his eyes. And he was very soft-spoken and gentle. And I remember him asking me the first time, "Are you seeing anybody?" And I said, "No." Might have said that already. Anyway, he was just very quiet and very caring, and I remember opening doors for me, and the guys that I dated in South America didn't do that kind of thing. Of course, they didn't have cars. So, but he was just a very soft-spoken, loving guy.
Tim made good grades in school. He graduated second in his class from high school. He was salutatorian, and he gave a speech on the night of graduation. My dad's told all the four of us children that he would see us through junior college, and then after that we were on our own. Tim attended Jones Junior College, and he graduated from there. After that, there really were no opportunities for jobs in our area. You either worked at the hardboard plant that my dad worked at, or you worked in a glove factory or blanket factory, which were in town. And during that time, the draft was going strong. So when Tim graduated from Jones Junior College, he decided he wanted to go into the Air Force. And my dad objected strongly to this. So they had a big argument. And Tim actually left in the night. And when we woke up the next morning, he was gone. And I remember my dad drove up and down the roads looking for him. But Tim pretty soon contacted us and told us that he had left to join the Air Force. The only time that my dad ever wrote a letter to anybody, he wrote to Tim while he was in basic training. He said that he wanted to make sure that there were no hard feelings between them. Tim and I wrote letters to each other during basic training, and after he finished that, and he and my mom also corresponded by letter. We didn't have a telephone, so the only way that we could keep in touch was through letters. Later, he was stationed in different places. He was stationed in Hawaii one time, and from there he sent me some earrings, had little orchids on them, which I still have. And he also sent me a purple dress. It was not the usual Hawaiian type, big floral prints or anything. It was a solid purple shift, and down one side at the bottom it had some embroidered flowers. I thought that was the prettiest dress I had ever seen, and I loved wearing it. We found out that he was going to marry Maggie through a letter that he sent to us, and then after they got married, he sent us a picture from the wedding. The first time we saw Maggie is when we went to Meridian to meet them. I don't remember if they had flown in or if they'd come in on a bus or what, but I remember the drive home sitting in the back seat with Tim and Maggie, and Tim made the comment that he had forgotten what southern drawls that we all had. I don't know what kind of life Maggie had in South America, but I'm sure it was quite a shock to come to our house and meet all of us in a poor county with not much of anything. But I immediately liked Maggie and got to know her. It was kind of hard on my mom because she really did not enjoy having people at our house, but I hope we all made Maggie feel at home.
The wedding was at Our Lady of Fatima Catholic Church. It was a brand new church, and I was able to get married there. The reception was held under one of my aunt's houses. She had a beautiful garden, and the house was high, and there was lots of room underneath. And we had a live band, because my brother-in-law played in a band. We had dancing, lots of good Guyanese food, and it was very, very small, just close friends and family. And my aunt and uncle, I spent a lot of summers sometimes staying with them at their house. And so they said we could have the reception there, and that's where we had it. It was wonderful. Yes, we went to the up to the Air Force Base for our honeymoon, and there was a big hotel there, and so we spent about 2 or 3 nights in a hotel. I'd never stayed in a hotel before, because we got married on December 28th, and he was going to have to be leaving in January. So then, after that, we lived together in a hotel until it was time to leave. But at the wedding, what's interesting about the wedding reception is my mother asked the colonel that she didn't want me to fly alone. I've never flown or never left Guyana, and asked if I could fly with him, and he gave permission. So
Wow.
I flew on a 130 Air Force plane, just with the mesh on the side, my first ever flight,
Oh my goodness.
all the way to Miami. The first time he had to leave for Vietnam, I only had James. He was about 2 years old, I think, and I didn't know how to drive. So when he found out he was going to have to go, I took he taught me how to drive, and I was able to get a driver's license, because I would not have been able to get anywhere, because we didn't live on base, we lived off base. And so he was going to be gone for 6 months. And he was gone, and came back. Then he had to go to Africa. He went to Africa for a few months. He was a data controller, so he went all over the place. The second time he had to go, he came back, and I got pregnant, and we had Debbie. And then the second time he had to go, Debbie was about not even a year old. James was almost 4. And that's when he was going on this secret mission. My mom came over and came from Guyana and stayed with the kids so that I could go to Washington, D.C. with him. And went to the Pentagon and got all the information and everything. It was very scary, not knowing, here I am, a little girl, grew up in Guyana, and now my husband is going on this secret mission and I can't tell anybody. So he said he wanted me to go to Canada and stay with family. So closed up my house and went to Canada. I was at my sister's house in Calgary. She was at work, I was babysitting the kids, and the phone rang, her home phone. That's the phone I gave them. We didn't have cell phones. And I knew when the phone rang that it was going to be bad news. And I picked it up, and they told me over the phone that there was this big ambush and he was missing in action. And I asked if he was dead, and they said, we can't tell you right now, but he's missing in action. So I wasn't even in the States when I found out. After about 2 months, I still wasn't hearing anything, so I decided to bring the kids and come back to the States. Opened up my mobile home that we were living in, so to try and get some more info. Well, I'll share when he first came back from Vietnam. That might have been second trip or Africa. He was gone a lot. Anyway, we decided we were going to take this blue Impala that we had and drive the kids to Canada to see, because that was the first time he was going to go. So he put a board in between the 2 seats, before seat belts, and pillows and blankets, and the kids just laid around back there while we drove. We stopped at Yellowstone National Park. We had some friends in Cheyenne, Wyoming. We stopped and saw them, went to Yellowstone. There was a bear that came up to the window, almost scared James to death. And just had a wonderful trip on the way, just stopping to see things. And really that was the last trip we took together. But we went to Calgary and went to the mountains, and he had never really traveled except in the military. So it was his first time, and he just loved it. And that's when he decided, because we had such a close family there, that when he was gone, he didn't want me and the kids being by ourselves. Because he knew it was dangerous, and he was afraid that something was going to happen. And right before he died, he had sent me a long letter, and I think Debbie has it. I kept it for years, telling me how dangerous it was and that somebody was killed and what they had to do for me to go through the insurance and all that. And so I knew that it wasn't, that's why I knew when the phone rang that I was going to get the message. But I always remember his smile and his eyes. It was just, yeah, I think that's what attracted me to him from the first time. And once we started dating, I knew that he was the one. He was very good with the kids and just a warm, gentle person.
I found out that Tim was MIA when I was at graduate school at the University of Southern Mississippi. I was living in what was called the Home Management House as a graduate fellow. And we were having supper one night and the phone rang, and it was my mom. One of the other girls answered the phone and called me into the phone, and it was my mom. We didn't have a telephone at our house at that time, and she had gone up to the main highway and used the telephone at a lady that she knew, and she called me and told me that he was missing in action. It was a very short phone call. My mom was really upset, and I remember it was a shock to me, and I kind of got myself together and went back in and finished supper with the other girls that were there. And then after supper was over, I told them about my brother. I finished graduate school and I went home. I was home for a few weeks before I was to leave for a summer job in Fairfield, Connecticut. And I remember the day that Maggie called and I answered the phone, and she told us that Tim was declared legally dead. And when I got off the phone, I told my mom, and I can still hear the agonizing sound that she made when I told her. I don't think that she ever quite accepted the fact that he was gone. She refused to have any type of service for him. I know Maggie had one in Louisiana, but my mom and dad never did. I went on to my summer job, and while I was gone that summer, my mom and dad really were not church goers, but they did go occasionally, and Tim was the one that drove Raymond, mostly Raymond and me, to church and Sunday school while he was at home. And he made a profession of faith and was baptized in a creek, as were Raymond and I at a later time. But the summer after he was declared officially dead, my dad actually made a profession of faith and was baptized. And he and my mom attended church regularly after that. Some time passed and several years, and Maggie wrote me a letter and told me that she had met someone and that she was thinking about marrying him. And she said she didn't know if it was the right thing to do because of James and Debbie. I remember I thought about it for a while, and I wrote her a letter back, and I told her that if she did what was the right thing for her, then it would naturally be the right thing for her children. She later asked me if I would be a bridesmaid at her wedding, and I told her that I would. But when I told my mom what I was going to do, she just did not like that at all. In fact, she told me that if I participated in her wedding as a bridesmaid, that it meant that I never cared anything about my brother, which was not true. So I had to call Maggie and tell her that I would not be a bridesmaid. But I did attend her wedding to James McKinney. I was teaching on the Gulf Coast at the time, and I got my roommate to drive me to the bus station. And I rode a Trailways bus to Bossier City and watched her marry. And we kept in touch after that. When a person dies young, they're kind of frozen in time. When I think of my brother, I remember good-looking 28-year-old. Even though the rest of us have aged and most people that knew him have died, he will always be that 28-year-old who was a man who loved his family, he loved his wife, he loved his children. And he is a brother that I will always be proud of.